Hi, everybody, and welcome to your latest episode of GTA Fancast with me, Gully. Rather than going into the ins and outs of the previous fixture against Crystal Palace, I thought, timing-wise, it might make sense to look at something a little bit more positive. And after a flurry of activity towards the end of the transfer window, Wolves actually look to have set themselves up with a squad that looks capable of at least staying in the Premier League, I think, and potentially doing better than that for Gary O'Neill. After what was obviously a bit of a tumultuous time with the lack of activity to begin with, and that rather frustrating situation around Mateus Nunes being sold, the kind of last 48 hours of the window were really fruitful. And I'm going to have a look at some of the signings that we've made. To begin with, I wanted to just highlight a bit of a squad depth chart, really. And those in green are obviously the players that we've brought in. We know all about Tom King and Matt Doherty. I won't be delving into them in any depth at this point, but I just wanted to highlight kind of the positions that seem to have featured so far, at least in the way that Gary O'Neill wants to set up. So we've gone with a bit of a 4-4-2 kind of system with relatively orthodox kind of central defenders, central midfielders, fullbacks, and wide midfielders. And I've just highlighted who I believe would slot into those positions, and those in orange are kind of duplicated in the sense that they can cover extra positions as well. So I think you can suggest that looks pretty healthy, pretty balanced. Maybe there are some question marks about some of the quality in the wide midfield area, but we'll get on to a couple of the options that we brought in there, obviously, and maybe. Obviously, the club were trying to bring in an extra striker on deadline day as well, but to no fruition. But I think it's a nice manageable number of players. It's not overloaded, and it feels like, whilst obviously we haven't got the distractions of European football and whatnot, players will get plenty of game time as well. And in the event of one or two injuries, we're not going to be stretched entirely. So we'll move on to kind of the players that have been brought in, and to begin with, Enzo Gonzalez. Now, this one was kind of out of left field. He's an 18-year-old who has come from Paraguay, followed the not so well trodden path into the Premier League that Julio Gonzalez kind of blazed the trail with last year with Brighton. And the simple point here is there's not a fat lot of information out there about him. So he's played, in terms of league fixtures, 32 times in his career in total. Given kind of the resources available to me, I've not seen a fat lot of him, obviously, and the YouTube stuff can highlight some nice things without necessarily getting a real, kind of holistic view of a player. But just wanted to highlight some of the points that the club said about him as a player. Winger with tricky feet and a small frame, but it's not just out wide where the 18-year-old has thrived during his first 9 months as a senior professional. Although favouring his left foot, Gonzalez poses a confident attacking attitude and can play across the front three, as he shows his skills on either side of the pitch or supporting the striker as a number 10. Now, my initial excitement around Gonzalez is that he looks like that kind of typical inverted winger type who is able to chop onto his favoured side off the right flank and get shots off at goal. It's an area of the pitch that I think we've struggled with, where Pedro Neto seemingly is unable to have a real strong impact, especially kind of being direct to goal with when he receives the ball on that side. And maybe we can use him as a bit of a wild card this season. I'm not expecting him to necessarily start a whole bunch of games. I think when you look at him in some of the videos that we've seen him already, he's quite a, you wouldn't say he's necessarily of an athletic build. I think there's probably some strength and conditioning work he can do to really get up to speed with the Premier League. But those natural attributes, that sharpness off a standing start, that low centre of gravity that you can see in some of the clips that you might have seen on YouTube of him, will be really, really exciting to see him develop at the club. And obviously, an area that we scouted that hasn't had a lot of focus, and maybe we've beaten a few to the punch on this one, and hopefully he can have a really successful time at Wolves. Second player I wanted to highlight, again, we've gone down the South American route here, was Santiago Bueno. Now, I think alarm bells were ringing ever since the sale of Nathan Collins as to our depth in the centre-back position. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about Nico Alvedi kind of almost being on the verge of joining throughout the summer. But Wolves not kind of pushing the button on that one based on finances and based on potential of players moving out. Thankfully, we've managed to bring someone in, and I think he's a really interesting player. He's 24 years old, and I think at that age, you aren't coming in to necessarily just be a bit part player. It's really important that he gets plenty of game time. Now, I'm not expecting him to dive into the team straight away, but I think there'll be a phasing in process. I think Craig Dawson has struggled a little bit with trying to play on the front foot in the game so far this season. It's not his natural game. And you can see here from the data that I've pulled from FB Ref, this is all obviously from Santiago Bueno's time at Girona last season, where he played in La Liga. He played over 100 times for them over the course of his time in Segunda Division and La Liga as well. Just certain attributes that I think he brings to the team that we're lacking a bit in at the moment. He's strong enough on his aerials, not quite as good as Kilman, but ahead of Dawson, who you'd consider a player that would be really heavily involved in aerial drills. So that's really good to see. Tackles and interceptions. He's obviously being a bit more proactive than the other guys defensively as well. Obviously, these numbers from last season for Kilman, Dawson, and Totti, and slight caveat on the Totti one that he played at fullback for a large portion of that time, so that kind of skews the numbers in his favour when it comes to things like dribblers challenge. Obviously, he's facing more one-on-one kind of battles, but I think the fact that Bueno is higher on that front in versus Kilman and Dawson goes to speak to the fact that maybe he was allowed to defend wider spaces in a more frequent manner. But you can also see on the ball, he's kind of well ahead of the group on progressive carries and progressive passes as well. So we're obviously bringing in a player who's got some talent on the ball. When you look at the clips, you can see that he likes a kind of long raking pass, and he's very aggressive in the air, which I think is really nice to see. And, you know, nothing wrong with bringing a Uruguayan centre-back into the fold, is there? Third player we brought in late doors was Tommy Doyle. Obviously, this was a bit of a deal done in conjunction with Mateus Nunes leaving the club. And I think the club have been really kind of pleased with the value of the signing. The option to buy is really quite a snip at £4.3 million. And he's a player who has relatively good experience for his age. He spent some time in Bundesliga 2 at Hamburg, where he didn't get too much football. But obviously, training in that environment and being going out abroad is all good stuff. Cardiff then took him on loan for the second half of that season, and he played plenty of times there. And then really kind of breakout season was last season at Sheffield United, where he won promotion with them. And alongside a couple of other, well, one at least other Man City loanee and James McAtee was really influential. I think it's important to note that he was the main set piece taker at Sheffield United last season, and ultimately came up with 7 goal contributions over the course of the season, which is really, really good for what was ostensibly a deep line playmaker. Someone who sits there, distributes the ball really nicely, and has good technique. And I think that's something that we're lacking slightly when you look at the type of midfielders that have been playing so far. Lemina and Gomez, very combative, very aggressive, but not necessarily players who are going to be totally incisive. You can see the really, really low numbers that Mario Lemina has posted from an XG, from an expected assisted goals metric as well, and shot creating actions. It's he's obviously not given that remit to do so. I've also included Ruben Neves' numbers from last season here as well, just to give a bit of a flavour of what the benchmark might be for a player of that type. I think Doyle might be expected to play that sort of role within the team. He looks to play a lot more longer passes, as you can see. They're not quite as often as Neves did, but getting the ball a bit more direct into our strikers and forwards in wider areas might be a bit of a ploy when he's on the pitch, as opposed to with Lemina and Gomez. And you can see there as well, shot creating actions, he comes up on top. I think obviously helped by the fact that he took a lot of set pieces. But yeah, I think he's an interesting signing that the club have been monitoring for a while, from what we understand. So looking forward to see how he features in the team. Will it be as part of that 4-4-2, as part of a midfield pair, or will it be as a third midfielder? Interesting thing to look ahead to. And I think the real star of the show in terms of the transfer window is obviously Jean Riglet Bellegarde. Now, he is someone that I can't say I knew anything about basically before this summer. He played for a Strasbourg side that finished 15th last season, so lower end of the table, but at the same time was posting really positive numbers from a creativity perspective. He, from what I've seen of him on clips on YouTube, etc., he looks like a really interesting kind of profile where the club have suggested he's a Mateus Nunes replacement. I don't think you'll see him necessarily carrying the ball to the 30, 40 yard extent that Nunes does, but what he will do is probably be better around the penalty area, around in some of those tighter spaces. And with that final delivery, you can see he has come up miles ahead of Nunes and Sarabia on every single metric that I've pulled out here. And this wasn't deliberate in the sense that I wanted to show metrics where he did do favourably, but just the kind of things that I'd expect a creative player in midfield to really excel in. And you can see straight away shot creating actions, expected assisted goals, carries into the final third, carries into the penalty area. I think that's a really interesting one for me. That he's obviously trying to break into that part of the pitch as often as possible and passes into the penalty area as well. He comes up trumps on every single one of those compared to Nunes and Sarabia, and this is where I'd expect him to fill that role, that kind of wider midfield role, where he's not a true winger, but someone who is able to get into creative positions, almost feature as a number 10 at times, from one of those flanks, and really influence the game. I just wanted to highlight as well, there's a guy on Twitter called Seb who has done a really deep look at Bellegarde from a scouting perspective. He's a guy who's worked in youth football in France previously, so I think it'd be worth giving a read to his blog around that, which I'll share a link for in the description. So, look, we're not necessarily where we want to be as a club at this moment in time, and there's clearly been a change of direction around finances and things like that. But that's also led to a change in direction around the transfer policy, and I think that can only be a good thing at this point. We were stung last year with some of our dealings with George Mendes in particular. Obviously, we stepped away from that and have allowed the recruitment team to really get to work on this. And I'm pleased to see we're bringing in some more interesting profiles, some more lesser well-known players as well, and players that have got a point to prove. Someone like Bellegarde comes in at the age of 25. He's not a young guy, taking a bit of time to mature in France. He's obviously got a lot of experience there. But as he started this season really positively as well, you can see that he's going to have the bit between his teeth. He can come into the team and look to show what a good player he is. And hopefully we'll reap the benefits of that as a club. And a few others there can do the same for us as well. So make sure you like, subscribe, and come back to the channel, as I'll be looking at, obviously, matches, players from a more in-depth perspective going forward as well. So I'll see you soon, guys.